We've finally reached the point where we can start making predictions for Clemson season. So we're going to go game by game. I'm going to give my official predictions for the Clemson season, but it's not just going to be me. I've got Will Harper from Shaking the Southland joining me. Will, thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Before we dive in, just want to remind folks, you see the logo in the top corner, Ready Vets. This channel is sponsored by Ready Vets. If you live in the upstate of South Carolina, save them in your phone. If you ever need them, they're open 7 days a week, and they could help out your pet when you really need it. And your vet's not open. So, Will, last year didn't go so well for us. We did the same podcast, and I think between us we had one loss predicted. I will say the loss was NC State, so we weren't wrong there, but probably could have picked a few more. So I'm interested to see your adjustment, and I do not know your pick, so I will be reacting genuinely along with anyone. And as folks are watching this live, tell us why we're too optimistic or too pessimistic in the comments. I'll try to share some of those and react to them as we go. So, Will, any thoughts on last year and maybe your mindset coming into this year and the program of the team before we get into the schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like last year, game one was so crazy. It felt like everything we were hoping and predicting and thinking about was just like completely off the table. It was like, okay, Duke lost. That was rough. We're out of here. I don't know what's going on anymore. I kind of took the rest of the season, my predictions with a grain of salt, because after that, it felt like we were just really off base. But definitely probably should have predicted a few more. I don't think the Duke loss was maybe to be expected, but a couple others in there could be argued maybe were obvious. So we'll see how we do. We'll see how we do it this season.
Yeah. So here's the schedule. And you mentioned starting off last season with a loss to Duke. Well, it's going to be harder this year with Georgia. So I'm going to let you give each prediction first, and then I'll add my prediction afterwards. So I'll let you go first in Georgia, your thoughts and your official pick.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this one is pretty much a loss in most Clemson fans' eyes, at least when it comes to predicting. It's pretty hard to call this a W straight off the bat. I think Clemson has a shot here, but there's a lot of questions I think we all have surrounding Clemson this year. And there's just a lot of unknown. It's a tough week one opponent, no doubt. If we come out on top of the win, it'll be great. But I'm not expecting that personally. I think this is going to be a loss. I have a lot of questions specifically with the offense. Is Cade going to take that next big step? Are we going to see him hit a new stage of his development? Is the offensive line, now being coached by Matt Luke, going to be an upgrade? Are we going to give him more time in the pocket to make better decisions? Are the receivers going to get separation? There's a lot of questions, and I think throughout the season, we'll see a lot of this answered, and hopefully in a positive way, but I'm not so sure if week one against the preseason number one team is going to be where it happens. So for me personally, I'm leaning towards a loss here. I won't be surprised if that's the same for you.
Yeah, no, what I thought was interesting on this one is, normally when we do like Q&As and things like that, I did a Q&A with Glenn Orman that'll be on Shaking the Southland, and I did a video one with Anthony Dasher of UGA Sports. And in both cases, I didn't say, are you picking Georgia or are you picking Clemson? I took the historic win percentage and said, do you give Georgia a better than 70% chance to win? Because historically, that's how they've done against Clemson. Both of them were confident in saying, yes, I think Georgia has a better than 70% chance of winning. So by that metric, I'd pick Clemson. I don't think Clemson, I think they have a 1-in-3 shot, maybe even better than that to win. I don't think it's a long shot. I think I have a little concern about the defense regressing, but I think the offense takes a big step. And I would pick them to cover a 2-touchdown spread if that's what it ends up at. But to win straight up, I certainly wouldn't pick that. That seems just a little bit homerish. Georgia owns the series. They've won 7 of 8. They've won 2 in a row. 43, 18, and 4. I think picking that when they're the number one team in the country is just a biased pick at this point. So yep. I'll pick Georgia. But I guess here's my other question about that before we move on is, let's say they lose 28-21. How are you feeling coming out of that?
I think you have to feel great. I mean, 28-21, touchdown or less, maybe a field goal even. I think that'd be impressive. I think it depends on the way we lose to. If it's 28-21 or if it's more like that 22 matchup where I think it was 10-3.
Yeah, that's bad.
We looked ugly. It was not great. I think both teams kind of walked away feeling a little bit shaky. Obviously, Georgia went on to have a really dominant season. Clemson, not so much. But I think if Clemson's able to score some touchdowns, come out with some firepower, I think about Georgia's halftime adjustments. I was doing some research, and I think Kirby in the third quarter last year his team was outscoring the differential was like 150-19. So he just definitely knows how to get his guys fired up in the right way and make those adjustments coming out of halftime. I think if Dabo can get his guys to hang with those changes and whatever strategies they're doing in the third quarter and hang around to the fourth, we definitely have a chance. And yeah, I think if it comes down to kind of a last minute touchdown, 1-score game, I think you have to feel pretty good walking away from that.
Yeah, I agree. And, talk about halftime adjustments. It's going to be different now with the iPads on the sideline. You can adjust a lot quicker. So I don't know if the halftime will be quite the same adjustment it
For sure.
typically is. All right. So we each have Clemson starting 0-1, and then comes App State. So App State's second game of the year. There's been a lot of talk about, don't overlook App State. They're a really strong G5, possible hangover, possible look ahead to the open date. How concerned are you? And are you still picking Clemson?
Yeah, I mean, just given App State's pedigree and kind of the aura surrounding them, for lack of a better term, you always have to be careful with App State. I think you can't overlook them for sure. This definitely feels like a trap game potential for Clemson, regardless of the outcome of week 1. I think if you walk away with a big win and upset over Georgia, emotions are high. We're stoked. Definitely possible you look past App State. You're not focused as much as you should be. But on the other side, if you come close and you can't quite beat Georgia, you got to be able to refocus and lock in for App State. So I think there definitely needs to be a lot of attention given to the team's focus and just getting everyone in the right mindset for this game. But all things considered, I don't think there's really too much of a chance here for App State to pull off much. Offensively, they're pretty strong. They return a lot of production from a statistically solid team last year. But I don't think they'll give Clemson too much of a struggle overall, especially at home. And I think Clemson should take this one pretty handily.
Yeah, I understand the, don't look past them kind of mantra. And I think that's great for the team. But as fans, let's be realistic. I mean, they had 5 losses last year. They're 9-5. They're a good Sun Belt team. But they lost at North Carolina, which is fine. They lost at Wyoming. They lost to Coastal. They lost at Old Dominion. They lost at Troy. Pretty bad. That's a 26-point loss at Troy. So they're a perfectly solid team, but they have no business coming into Clemson winning, and Clemson would have to really play like a D or an F game for that to happen. So as a fan, I predict that one with some confidence. So we're both so far together, and we have them at 1-1. They hit the open date, get some rest before a potentially tricky NC State team. I'm used to sneering and looking down my nose at them, but now they've beaten us 2 out of 3 and can't really count on a win here. How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, this is outside of Georgia. I feel like probably the game I feel most nervous about when it comes to just picking straight up. I really think NC State, like you said, has kind of had our number recently. They are definitely a team that is always right on our heels or punching just past us. Obviously, they've been chasing that 10-win season ever since, I think it was Chuck Amato got it back in early 2000s.
Yeah, like
They had really a close chance last year with Kansas State in that Pop-Tarts Bowl, and then they didn't pull it off. So, they've been steady, but never quite elite, but still good enough to be a thorn in Clemson's side. And over the last decade, I'm pretty nervous for this one. I think there's a lot riding on Grayson McCall coming in from Coastal, and he's kind of the big transfer for that program right now. I think all eyes are going to be on him. But whether or not it's going to be enough to really push them past Clemson defensively, I'm not really sure. If we're thinking percentage-wise, I don't think this is like Clemson has above 70%, 70-30. I think it is pretty close. I would even say maybe a toss-up. Obviously, the big advantage here is it is going to be in Death Valley. I think Clemson takes this one ultimately, but it should be probably one of the closest games of the regular season in my mind. I would be surprised if we blow them out.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a blowout. We'll see how good Clemson's defense is. As much as they bring in good talent, and they've got some strong receivers. Casey Concepcion, awesome slot receiver, obviously, for NC State. For some reason, the offense just doesn't work there. I don't know what it is. I don't know if Dorn's meddling. I have no reason to believe he is. I'm not implying that, but they struggle to run the ball even when they have great running backs. Their offensive linemen get drafted above Clemson's guys, and they still struggle to run the ball consistently. It's very odd. So it's kind of a show me, and then I'll believe that your offense is legit. So I feel okay about this. I'm nervous about it because Clemson loses to Georgia. They come back. They beat App State. They take the open date, and they lose again. not saying the season's over, but it feels a little bit that way. And even though last year ended really strong, it's actually more fun to start strong and fade if that's how the season's going, because then you have hope and anticipation versus all the goals going out the window early. That's what was so tough for me last season is by the time they started winning and playing great, all the hopes and dreams of the team were already dead. So it was nice and glad they won, but it's not the same as when you're dreaming about a playoff. So nervous about it, but I feel pretty good about this, and I've got Clemson winning as well. So let me put it back up there. So that has Clemson 2-1 with Stanford coming to town for the first time as an ACC team, which is pretty weird. How do you feel about Stanford as the game right before Florida State?
Yeah, they're definitely one of the strangest moves in this modern college football conference realignment dance we've been playing now. I think they've been 9-27 over the last 3 seasons, and then they get kind of rewarded with an entry into the ACC. It's definitely a bit of an odd addition. I think it's going to be a lot of interesting matchups for ACC teams to have to travel to Stanford and Stanford to come visit. So I'm not necessarily hating on it, but it's definitely one of those weirder moves, I think. I don't really expect Stanford to do too much this year. Their defense was pretty much dead last in the nation in total defense last year. I think it's going to give Clemson an opportunity, if they've been struggling to this point in the season, to really open up and flex and kind of light up the scoreboard, build some confidence as a team. I think Stanford's probably going to hit 4 wins again for the first time in a few years, but not much more than that. And I'd be surprised if this game is really close at all.
Yeah, they're not great at running the ball, and their defense is soft, so they're not going to play keep away. And Clemson should be able to pass on them. They had I think it was the dead last pass defense last year. So this is an opportunity for Cade Klubnik to really shine. Of course, you sort of had a similar situation this past season against Wake Forest, and that was one of the offense's worst games. So this is where I'm looking for Clemson to show focus, come out, be dominant, stay healthy before the big game at Florida State. So then we turn our attention to the Seminoles, and this is probably the big game for us to talk about here. People aren't going to be too surprised that we picked Georgia, but here's where we potentially might differ. Your thoughts on Clemson now going to face DJ Uiagalelei in Tallahassee?
Here's the thing. With Florida State, I feel like on paper, I just want to pick Clemson. It just feels better. It feels right. I don't think in my fan heart that it's really going to be a loss here. Unfortunately, given how last season went, I feel like I have to rein it in a little bit, and I got to be a little bit more realistic with myself, maybe take off the shades. Florida State is the second team on Clemson's schedule that'll have gone 13-1 last year, I think. They're definitely going to be hungry and eager to prove they belong in this expanded playoff. Everyone knows last season their controversial snub from the 4 teams playoff, but I think they're going to be hungry. They're going to be really fired up to prove that they can belong here. It's their first true road test for Clemson. It's going to be difficult. Again, I think Clemson definitely has a chance here. Again, more like a toss-up, kind of like that NC State game. Obviously, the big storyline is DJ Uiagalelei, who's now on his 3rd roster in as many years, I believe. He had really similar stats at Oregon State as his last year with Clemson compared to where he performed last year. I think it was pretty much identical yardage, 1 more touchdown, and then pretty much the same interceptions. So very similar production out there. I wouldn't say he looked magnificent or looked like he was really punching through his ceiling that we'd seen at Clemson. Whether Florida State is able to get more out of him with Norvell, we'll see, but I don't know. It's an interesting matchup for sure. I like to think, again, Clemson has this one. I think if you just made me pick up, in a vacuum, call this game, I'd pick Clemson. But when we're looking at the full total schedule of Clemson, I feel like I have to lean towards a loss here, if only just to protect my integrity and make sure I'm not getting too carried away here with Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, if you pick us to go 11-1 and we go 7-5, I'm not going to let you hear the end of it. But terrible pick here. I think you're wrong. I do not believe in Florida State this year. I don't know if I'd go as far as John Sarian here, who in the comments says, will DJ you even be the quarterback by the time they play Clemson? I think he will be. I don't think he's bad per se, but just think last year you had Jordan Travis throwing the ball to Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. That's pretty elite. This year you have DJU throwing to Malik Benson and Kentram Potier. I mean, these guys are a huge step down. I butchered that name. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to be disrespectful, but it's just a huge step down. And if you remember the Clemson game, it was a lot of just chuck it up and let elite receivers win. And that's really how they got the game-winning touchdown in overtime to Keon Coleman. They're not doing that this year. They just lost a lot. So I just don't really believe in them. That's not to say I think Clemson's necessarily going to win the national championship, but
yeah,
I think Clemson goes on the road and they win in Tallahassee.
Yeah, I respect that. I think it also depends on how you view Mike's usage of the transfer portal. He's kind of the polar opposite of Dabo when it comes to that. He's not afraid to fill his roster with guys from across the country. That squad last year had a lot of those same transfer type players. They've got some good bodies. I think they have a pretty strong defense. I'm with you. I don't really buy that their offense is going to be all that great. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't even top maybe, 20 in Death Valley, or excuse me, in Tallahassee. That's where it'll be.
Yeah.
But I do think their defense is going to give us some fits. I think they have a good secondary, especially. I'm hoping by this point in the season, Cade is really in sync with some of his receivers, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not an issue, and we just kind of control the game and dominate them. But I don't know. I think DJ aside, I think Florida State has a pretty good chance here. So I don't know. I'm afraid.
All right, we got a question before we move on. I think this is a good one. What's more likely, a 5-0 start or a 2-3 start? Let me pull up the schedule. So let's see. That's right before the Florida State game. I'll say a 5-0. I know that includes Florida State. So that could be losing to Georgia, NC State, and Florida State.
Man, nightmare scenario.
Yeah, I mean, then season's over. So that, to me, I'd rather finish weak than have my spirit broken and then have half the season with a broken spirit to drag myself through. I don't know. I don't really think either are super likely, but I would lean more towards 5-0. You sort of need a lucky break against Georgia versus complete disaster throughout the entire first half.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's get back. So then after the trip to Florida State, they go to Wake Forest. Wake was not great last year, but they're super veteran this year. They got a new quarterback coming in, transfer from Louisiana Tech, and they got Donovan Green returning. So one would think their passing offense would take a big step forward. It's Hank Bachmeier, the former Boise State quarterback. But they've lost 15 in a row to Clemson. Any chance they break that streak?
Yeah, 4-8 last year. I think I was a Wake truther last year, but I was pretty disappointed. I have a buddy who went to grad school there, so I've always kind of a soft spot for them. But I was definitely surprised with last year how horrendous they were offensively. Like you mentioned, I think they're bringing in some good pieces, but I'm not really sure if it's going to be enough to generate an offensive renaissance. I think Clemson's probably going to take this win pretty easily. Their offensive line is also just pretty weak, and I think Clemson's line is probably going to feast and rack up some sacks. So barring anything crazy, I don't think this is a game that should be close for Clemson. Yeah.
Now, I will say they should be better, and it's not at Clemson. So you can't do the mess they did last year where they played an F game and Wake Forest was bad enough and it was in Clemson and they were able to win. Yep. That could result in a loss. But if they just play even as a C game, I think they should be a lot better than Wake Forest. I think it's a tough deal for Dave Clawson now, sort of as college football is evolving. I think it's only tougher and tougher and tougher up there in Winston-Salem. Yeah. Let's not spend too much time on this one. Let's jump to Virginia. Your thoughts on that game, the first matchup with Tony Elliott?
Yeah, Tony Elliott, poor guy. He's really struggled up there. I think it's been really hard for him to get anything positive going in Charlottesville. Obviously hoping to turn things around this year, but I'm not seeing too much for them this year either. I think they've got a few good pieces. Former Clemson running back Kobe Pace is still there. He's hoping to boost, maybe create is a better word, his draft stock with the big senior year, but I don't like their offensive line. I think that's going to create a lot of problems for them. They've got a ton of offensive transfers coming in from the portal in their receiving room. I think they have Chris Tyree from Notre Dame. They had a guy from Kent State. They had Andre Green from North Carolina, a couple tight ends, including Sage Ennis, again, a Clemson former player. So there's a lot of moving pieces there. There's a lot of kind of unknown. I don't know. I think there's a chance that they'll kind of maybe find something special and put together 6-7 wins, but I'm not really seeing anything too impressive from them. I think it's probably one of the clearer wins on the schedule, and Clemson should probably roll Virginia.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably among the least interesting games on the schedule. I mean, even App State, it's early, you're excited. The Citadel, Military Appreciation Day. That's always special. To me, this is one of the least interesting games. I don't think they're very good. I also don't take as much joy in a blowout over a former Clemson coach who I like. So it's kind of weird in that regard. Obviously, you want to win decisively, but it's not like taking a lot of joy in just pummeling them. You do have Kobe Pace, former Clemson guy, is their starting running back. You have Malcolm Green is a starting cornerback from them, also from Clemson. Sage Ennis is a backup tight end. So a lot of Clemson guys coming back. And then, as you mentioned, Chris Tyree, former running back, now slot receiver from Notre Dame. But yes, I don't think they're a huge threat. So after them, you get your second open date before what I think is the toughest back-to-back. And just to check in, we have Clemson losing to Georgia so far, and then rattling off wins against App State, NC State, Stanford, Florida. I have Florida State. You have a loss there. And then Wake Forest and Virginia. So I have Clemson at 6-1. You have them at 5-2 through this point. They have their open date. Then they host Louisville, who's never beaten Clemson, 0-8. But they were more impressive last year, at least by the record, against a somewhat soft schedule. But they played for an ACC championship and were a whisker away from winning it. Does Louisville finally get over the hump after going 10-4 last year? Do they beat Clemson finally?
That's one of my favorite stats, that Louisville's never beaten Clemson. I love that. There were so many close games over the last decade with them. It's such a fun series to me. It's one of my favorites in the ACC, and I love that they haven't won yet. So it's going to come eventually one day, I think. I don't think it's this year. Their team is certainly on the rise. Like you mentioned, they had a great year last year, one of their best in the program. I think it was their first 10-win season since joining the ACC. Braum had a pretty excellent transfer portal offseason. I think he had a lot of good pieces. You look at their defense, they were superb last year. I think they were first in the nation in red zone defense, first in the ACC in scoring defense. They've got a lot of good pieces. That being said, I think they have a chance to be great in 2024, but I don't know if they're going to survive a road trip to Death Valley. Looking at their schedule, they should be 6-2, maybe better coming into their matchup, but I'm not sure if they find a 7th win in the season against us. I just don't really like their offense too much as of right now on paper. I think they have a big question mark. And Tyler Shaw, coming from Texas Tech, previously he was at Oregon. He's kind of struggled to stay healthy. He has some talent, but I'm not really sure if he's going to be the guy. They obviously brought in Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama as well, Colin Lacey from South Alabama. They've got Miami's running back, Donald Chaney. So there's a lot of potential pieces here, I think, on both sides of the ball. But whether or not it's going to be enough to punch through, I'm not believing. I think Clemson wins.
Yeah, I typically am higher on Louisville than the market, so to speak. I was really high on them last year. Drafted them in our conference champions draft, so it was a win away from a Hail Mary hit there. But I don't see him coming into Clemson and winning, and I think getting him late is also good because Tyler, as you mentioned, their quarterback transfer, Tyler Shaw, he gets hurt quite a bit. Is he going to be healthy in November? I don't know. Also, I think it gives Clemson time for some of the youngsters on defense to grow up. The offense gives them time to gel. I feel pretty good about this one. And then I think it gets more interesting right after that because they got to turn around and go to Virginia Tech. John Sarian says that's the game at Virginia Tech is the one that he thinks can be a surprise. He thinks they'll be ready to play in Doak, maybe not in stadium. Do you think they'll be ready?
Yeah, I think Virginia Tech has a lot of people's dark horse pick in the ACC this year. They've got a lot of pieces in place to make a run at the championship. They've got a really favorable schedule. I think their schedule, they should pretty easily hit 9 or even 10 wins, and their roster definitely has the potential to find those wins. However, this is where I might differ a little bit. I'm not really a big believer in them this year. I'm maybe sliding away from the hype. I think they have a lot of good pieces, but I'm not really. I just don't see them being able to knock off the Tigers. I think they're getting a lot of hype that isn't totally warranted given their pretty mediocre campaign last year. They only went 7-6. Sure, they blew up Tulane in the bowl they played, but I don't know. I don't really buy that their stock is as high as it maybe some people are thinking. I think by this point in the season, like you mentioned, Clemson does generally seem to work out kinks as they go along and kind of get that ball rolling. You mentioned how it's not as fun when you lose early and then start winning late. But I think as a program, Clemson does do this well under Dabo's leadership. I think by this point, Clemson's either going to be rolling and able to dismantle the Hokies pretty easily, or they might have several losses and will still be wandering a bit. But I'm hoping and thinking it's the former. And I think Clemson takes another W here.
So speaking of improving throughout the year, that's something that the Virginia Tech did quite well last year. They started off quite poor. After beating Old Dominion, they lost to Purdue, lost to Rutgers, lost to Marshall, beat Pitt, and then lost to Florida State, sitting at 2-4. After that, they rattled off wins against Wake Forest, Syracuse, Boston College, Virginia, and Tulane, with only losses to Louisville on the road and NC State on the road mixed in there. So really strong finish. But I think Kyron Drones, their quarterback, who's a great running threat, ran all over Tulane in a memorable rain game. I think he's one of the big reasons why I'm high on this team. He didn't start right off the bat. He did play in some of those poor performances early, but he emerged as kind of a star player for them as the year wore on. Also, Ali Jennings was a wide receiver that I was really high on from Old Dominion. I really wanted Clemson to add him. Of course, Clemson did not. He went to Virginia Tech. I was really bitter about it at the time. And then he got hurt pretty early in the season. Well, he's back. And, I don't know if he's 100% per se. But if he is, now you found your quarterback. He's got nearly that full year of experience, and you've got a go-to receiver. I think Jennings is key for them because they need a big-time receiver. But if he's there, it's going to be tough. Kind of like you. This is kind of like you said with Florida State. It's a toss-up game. Maybe I'm picking it individually. I don't pick Clemson to lose. But in the totality of the schedule, this is one that's it's right after a tough game against Louisville. I've got them beating NC State. I've got them beating Florida State. I see them losing at least 2, so I'll have them losing this. Not just both up at 7-2 with 3 games to go in the schedule.
Fair enough.
So let's get back to the schedule. So then they wrap up with at Pittsburgh, the Citadel, and South Carolina. So Pittsburgh has given Clemson fits. I know they weren't good last year, but they should be better. Finally turning to a non-transfer for their quarterback, Nate Yarnell. Richard Jr. should start for them. So finally looking inward, does that solve their woes?
Yeah, I hope for Pitt's sake they find some more success here. Unfortunately, I think this is one of 2 gimmies in this final stretch of Clemson's schedule. I think Pittsburgh obviously pretty much just collapsed last season, 3-9. They barely scraped together those 3 wins in what wasn't a particularly difficult schedule. Offensively, they were dead last in a number of statistical categories. The hope here for Pitt, I think, is, of course, one of the hottest offensive coordinators in Cade Bell. His Western Carolina offense was incredible, led the nation in total scoring, was right up there in a number of categories. But whether or not he's going to be able to turn around an abysmal Pitt offense, I think remains to be seen. Again, maybe they surprise me and they pop off this year. For me, I have little to no expectations for what Pitt's going to accomplish this season. I'm trusting that Clemson's going to be able to pick up one of the easier wins this year.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm that confident about it. I mean, yeah, they were bad last year. They beat Wofford. They beat Louisville, which was a big upset, but it was a big rain game at home. And they beat Boston College, which was a bit of an upset, but nothing crazy. That was it. Losses to Cincinnati, West Virginia, Wake Forest, Syracuse, and Duke. So they were bad last year. But when the quarterback play is as bad as it was, it's hard to win too much. And that should at least be better. Clemson has not done well against them historically. So I don't know I think Wake Forest is an easier game on the road. I think Stanford's an easier game. I think Virginia is a much easier game. So I wouldn't put it in as a gimme. I would say those 3 are easier. I would say App State, which some people may disagree, is easier, and certainly the Citadel. But yes, I have Clemson winning. I have them at 8-2, and then we go to the Citadel. I don't know if you have much to say here. I have Clemson winning. I'm guessing you do as well.
Yeah, not too much to say here. The Citadel has, I think, historically had some seasons where it can challenge the other Carolina teams. I think everybody remembers their amazing victory over South Carolina. I think it was 2015, but they don't typically produce much more than that. I don't think 2023 was anything they'd like to remember. And personally, I don't think there's much reason to hope for more than a few wins on their schedule in 24. So definitely an easy win here. Like you mentioned earlier, Military Appreciation Day, it's always a fun time. So should be at least a little entertaining for that, if nothing else.
Yeah, I actually kind of like playing the Citadel here because it feels right. And Clemson, for all the complaints and weenie whining I might give about how they handle the Hill or the music or whatever nonsense I complain about, the way they do Military Appreciation Day is really beautiful. And to do it with the Citadel is really cool. It's well done. So always kudos for them. So let's wrap here with South Carolina. The Palmetto Bowl is back in Clemson. Obviously, the last time it was in Clemson, it didn't go well, but Clemson smothered them defensively last year to get back on the right side of that rivalry. Your thoughts on South Carolina? They've got a pretty tough slate leading into the game.
Yeah, definitely one of the harder schedules, I think, in the country. They play 7 preseason top 20 AP teams. So Shane Beamer definitely has his hands full with this year's schedule. He's been cooking for a few years. I like Shane Beamer overall. I think he's a great guy. I like what he's doing with their program. Obviously, it's hard to get totally behind someone who's at Carolina. They're definitely my childhood biggest rival, I feel like, growing up in South Carolina. So it's my favorite regular season game every year for Clemson. I love the Palmetto Bowl. I think it's going to be a good matchup this year. Carolina's definitely struggled with some injuries lately. Last year was tough. I don't think Gamecock fans got to really see the full firepower of Beamer ball in action, but they've added some portal additions. My biggest questions is definitely at the QB position. They lose Spencer Rattler. I don't think that's going to bode particularly well for their offense, but who knows? Maybe they have a few transfers coming in. Maybe this one of them sticks out and is able to put a lot together with the home field advantage. And I might be, I don't know, knock on wood here, given how 2022 went, but I don't think there's a way Clemson allows South Carolina to upset them in Death Valley again, like they did in 22. I think Clemson's going to make it 2 in a row this year.
Yeah, South Carolina, tough road to hoe. I hadn't counted the ranked teams, but now I'm looking at it, as you say, at LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama on the road, that is, at Norman, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Missouri, who's 11th, and then at Clemson. I mean, that is brutal. I mean,
Brutal.
They have to statistically, they have to pull an upset every one of those teams and then be perfect the rest of the way, which includes a road trip to Kentucky that I'm not so sure they'll win just to get to a bowl.
Yeah.
I'm not real high on them this year. And that's not to say I'm never high on them. Sometimes, when they have Spencer Rattler, I have a very different opinion. I thought it was a big coup when they brought him in, but I'm a little hesitant about Sellers at quarterback, and they're going to try to do the whole Kelly Bryant run the ball with the quarterback thing. I'm a little hesitant about that. He threw 4 passes all of last year, so they didn't give him a whole lot of opportunities. They do add Rocket Sanders from Arkansas, a really good running back, so it's going to be a really heavy ground and pound. But they lost so much from the passing game. Xavier Legette also gone, 1,255 yards last year. He's gone. Trey Knox, their tight end's gone, and Marion Brown, their other receivers, gone. So they lose all their best receivers. They lose their quarterback. I just don't bet on anyone, even if it was Georgia. I don't bet on anyone to just pound it in Clemson's face again and again and again and beat them. Yep. It's very, very rare. And maybe Georgia is a type of team who could do that, but certainly not South Carolina. So I think it's going to be really hard for them to win with that style of play against Clemson.
Yeah.
So let's conclude with a final look at the schedule. So we each have Clemson going 10-2, if I got that right. You have losses against Georgia, in Atlanta, and at Florida State. I have the same loss against Georgia and then a loss at Lane Stadium against Virginia Tech. So 10-2. I'd be pretty happy with that. That would put Clemson almost assuredly in the ACC championship with a chance an automatic qualifying win and a bye in the playoffs. So your thoughts, and if we're right, are you cheering not just for yourself but for the Tigers?
Yeah, 10-2 I think is great. The expanded playoff is going to be exciting. I think it's awesome for college football. I have some friends who are not big on it, but I think it's a great change. 10-2 certainly gets us in the conversation. You win the ACC championship. Maybe it's Miami or FSU or NC State. I don't know who would be there exactly. We're thinking, and maybe we'll get to that in a second. But I think 10-2 and a loss in the ACC championship, you're probably not getting in. Maybe. I think if we go 11-1 with just losing to Georgia and you lose the championship, you're probably still in. So 10-2 is certainly a favorable spot to be in. I'd be happy. I think it'd be a good step forward from last season, and hopefully would get us into playoff contention.
Yeah, I think that's my perspective as well. If they're 10-2, you might need to win the ACC because that third loss they shouldn't really penalize you, but they would, especially if it's a situation where, let's say in your scenario, we beat Florida State and we're playing Miami in the championship game, and Florida State's sitting on the sideline with 2 losses. We have 2 losses. We pick up a third. Maybe they jump us. Or you could say the same with Virginia Tech. I guess I reverse the scenarios, but in your scenario, maybe Virginia Tech has 2 losses and they're sitting out, or in my scenario, Florida State is the one sitting out. I could see them jumping us. Just real brief, I have a separate video with a whole playoff draft and official prediction, so we don't need to get too into it. I do have Miami as one other ACC team in the playoff. Do you have any other ACC teams in the playoff?
I think I see Miami or Florida State. I don't think there'll be 3 ACC teams in the playoff. That'd be surprising to me. I think we're going to see a lot of SEC teams, some of the Big Ten teams. I think it's either Miami or Florida State, depending on how that head-to-head matchup goes and Clemson's matchup with Florida State. Like you said, if Florida State has 2 losses and then Clemson stumbles, I think it's very likely that they would jump in over us. But if Florida State, only has 1 loss, or Miami is in that situation with 1 loss, and maybe they take the ACC championship game, or even if they stumble there, and ending up 11-2 or something like that, I think it'd be pretty surprising for 2 of those top ACC teams to not get in. But 3 would be impressive, and I mean, it'd be cool, but I would be surprised there.
Yeah, as much as the teams play each other, Clemson dodges Miami, but could play an ACC championship. They'd play Florida State, and of course, Florida State and Miami play each other. So it'd be tough to get 3 in, especially with the sort of the jockeying and PR that the SEC and Big Ten do such a better job at. So I think that'd be tough. But from my perspective, get in the playoff. Don't get embarrassed in the playoff. The year's a success. Let's just start moving back to where we were. I don't expect them. It's not championship or bust. It's not even make the championship game or bust like it was maybe 17, 18, 19, 20.
For sure.
Let's look like we're trending back that way. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right where I am. I think we make the playoff. I'm happy. After that, we're playing with house money. Take a win, maybe. That'd be even great. But I think just making the playoff, making the ACC championship should be our reasonable goals. And if we hit those, I'm happy.
Yep, me too. Yeah, John Zarian says a 3-loss ACC team is a big long shot. I agree. Yeah, I want to see Clemson 11-2 to me after the conference championship game, or 10-2 prior. That's the goal for me. That's my prediction. So I'm being optimistic. I think I gave a fair pick, and a pick that if they hit it, I'm really proud of them. So let's hope I'm right in that regard. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Just hoping we hit 10 wins, man. That was tough last season, and I'm hoping we're getting back to, like you said, just trending towards the playoffs and getting those 10, 11 win seasons. So yeah, I'm right there with you. If we hit 10, I'm happy.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for doing this. Appreciate you as always.
No problem. Thanks, Ryan.